Alrighty, good afternoon everyone. We'll get this webinar kicked off now. As you guys are aware, we're here presenting a webinar that looks at e-learning and the learning ecosystem. Obviously the idea here being is introduce people who are perhaps familiar with the ecosystem to how e-learning fits, and obviously people who are familiar with e-learning, give them a bit of an idea around what the learning ecosystem is and what that looks like. For those of you who have attended previous webinars we've run, you already know this, but for anyone who's new, we allow questions all the way through using the question functionality, so keep them coming through as we go. We also have an opportunity at the very end of the session to cover off, I guess, in a more formal way, any questions you have. And again, just using the question capability of GoTo will be perfect. Other than that, obviously, if you're finding you've got any challenges around audio or maybe a delay in the screens popping up, let us know and we'll adjust to make sure that no one gets left behind and everyone's got a really pleasant experience. For today's presentation, it's co-hosted. I'm Raf, so I am the Head of Client Solutions here at Pure Learning. I'm from a background of e-learning, and e-learning has been my passion for some time. Also, as of quite recently, webinars have been my passion of being able to share my knowledge. I've also got Cam here with me today.
Yeah, so hi everyone, my name's Cameron McOmish, and I'm the Practice Director of Learning at Future Knowledge. And Future Knowledge is a consultancy, and we really specialise in user adoption. That's mainly around kind of the change management, technology implementations, and definitely a big part of that is learning and development. And I've been in the learning and development field for around 10 or 11 years in various different roles, from instructional design to managing teams to developing e-learning to developing instructor-led training and whatnot.
So great wealth of, I guess, knowledge between myself and Cameron, the effort today is going to be to transfer as much of that without, I guess, going overboard around, I guess, Cam from a ecosystem perspective and me from an e-learning perspective. So we'll jump in now. Obviously, as I mentioned, any sort of challenges around audio, let us know. But yeah, so we'll kick off. Cameron.
Yeah, so obviously the title of this webinar is quite related to the learning ecosystem. And the learning ecosystem, or learning and performance support ecosystem, is really a concept developed by Mark Rosenberg and Steve Foreman back in, they were working on it around 2013, 2014, kind of released it to market in DevLearn of 2014. So I was lucky enough to be there and meet with those guys, and really resonated with me. How effective it is in providing, I guess, a model or a methodology which connects people and supports them through a broad range of content, processes and technologies, and really looks at driving performance. So at the moment it's kind of it is building in its popularity in the US and Europe, and it's definitely becoming, it's kind of like the new 70-20-10 kind of aspects to it, has aspects of that 70-20-10, but it's kind of growing now in Australia, and we're really trying to drive it with all our clients. And the real advantage of a learning ecosystem is it's going beyond just a single learning event, and from a learning and development perspective, we know that a single learning event isn't very effective at A, driving retention, or B, being available at a particular moment of learning need. So it's a really user-centric model, and it puts users in the center of their learning experience and supports them with 6 primary components, being talent management, performance support, knowledge management, access to experts, social networking, and structured learning. And from those 6 components, you can craft an infinite number of dynamic learning and performance solutions or learning pathways. And we do that in a variety of different ways, and it's mostly through sequencing or layering elements of this ecosystem, and we'll dive into each one of them in more detail. But it depends really on the work requirements and the organisation at hand, and whether it's a particular project implementation or it's an organisational learning and development implementation. But you can sequence or layer these elements in the ecosystem to provide different learning solutions for different people. You might precede structured learning with a knowledge management component. You might follow it with a social networking component, but you can effectively create a pathway that's fit for any level of proficiency in your organisation. And when I talk about proficiencies, mainly talking about kind of that novice experience or expert proficiency. So you can define a learning pathway for a novice, which might be very heavily reliant on structured learning if they're learning something for the first time. You might then follow that up with more of a heavier reliance on maybe talent management, so that they know where their role, their job role is, and what competencies are required to further their career. But when you move it on all the way through to an expert level, their learning needs or their proficiency is different. So you can structure their learning pathway or allow them to structure their own learning pathway, and that might be more reliant on things like access to experts or social networking, collaboration, and knowledge management, where they're really trying to just refine their understanding or their learning efforts, or they're acting as in the position of providing that expertise or generating that knowledge management. So we'll move on and we'll look in these in more detail and see how e-learning really relates and resonates with each element of the ecosystem. But structured learning is probably one element there that we're very familiar with. And when we look at structured learning, we're looking at really precisely designed learning programs or learning artifacts. So that's really where instructional design plays its biggest part and at its best. But the idea behind structured learning is that we want to aim to, well, from an organisational level, we want to train and certify people. We want to make sure that people are working to the requisite requirements. It is usually a single learning event that we're developing, unless we're kind of developing a curriculum or a capstone learning experience or learning artifact, and it's usually via a formal approach. So you'd be more familiar with this. It's usually kind of the instructor-led training. You have a classroom environment with a facilitator and materials, activities, etc. So from an organisation's perspective, the idea is to train and certify. But from an actual person or a user's or a participant's perspective, they really just want to learn something, and it's usually for that first time.
So in terms of, I guess, where e-learning fits into that, and as Cam mentioned there, that structured learning piece is something that most organisations are, I guess, familiar with in the way that they're already doing. They already have training, it's formal, and they have a plan, and it's, covering stuff that people need to learn for the first time. Examples of this, I guess, that a lot of organisations are really familiar with are things such as inductions. So, someone's joined your organisation, you're not, I guess, at that point being responsive to their particular learning need. There's just an expectation that everyone's going to complete their induction. That may be a blended induction, or it may be all completely online, or it may be, face-to-face led, depending on the organisation. But the idea there, of course, is that at that point, you're not being, I guess, responsive to a need. You're going, right, you're starting with this organisation. As part of coming on board, you need to go through our induction. That'll give you an idea of what the expectations are for the business, the values of the business, how your role fits in, and all those sort of topics. Other examples of e-learning that is in that structured space is obviously compliance training. So again, there's a plan. Everyone's going to be completing this training, annually, biannually, whatever that looks like. And there's obviously organisations that have their own compliances that they want to meet. And again, the plan there being, hey, you're working for this organisation. There's an expectation that regardless of, job performance or you looking to progress your career or anything like that, you will be doing compliance training because there's a requirement of the business. And it's kind of non-negotiable. It's a very, I guess, rigid learning object where you'll be doing it annually regardless of performance, et cetera, et cetera. And the other one, I guess, that organisations will be familiar with is site safety training. So again, it's really a case of you are just about to enter a particular environment, a particular role, and the expectation is you'll learn how to safely work at this site, how to ensure your safety, the safety of others. So it's very, I guess, a push approach at learning at this point. There isn't too much in terms of what do you need. There's a case of we need you to complete all this learning. And I guess in terms of delivery, all these things can vary. So it can be, M-learning depending on the environment. It could be videos, and it can be traditional e-learning courses. The key differentiator for all of these is you're completing this regardless of any other factors. It's simply a requirement of you coming on board into a role and making sure that you're up to speed on what you need to do as the base expectations.
Right, so the next area within that ecosystem is in terms of talent management. And really here, we're talking mainly around the governance of a learning pathway and making sure that people are following a learning plan which is in line with the organisation's requirements. So here, really what people are seeking, or participants are seeking to do, is to really move their careers forward. And to find the best place for themselves in the organisation, and that might be through development plans which might progress their career, and they know what's required to kind of climb the ladder. So effectively, a participant or an employee is trying to advance or improve themselves throughout that workforce. From an organisation's perspective, it's really a matter of being able to identify who in that workforce is the most fit for a particular role. So it's really about identifying in the company or in the organisation where people should sit based upon their abilities. And it really develops, or it runs in line with competencies that are developed for that organisation. And it's usually a pathway that leads on to structured learning or to performance support, which we'll get to in a little bit later. All right now. So when we look at performance support, and I'm not sure how many people are familiar with performance support, but it's really around providing learning aspects in the workflow. So it's looking to provide assistance or learning at a particular moment of need in that workforce. So it needs to be really short, sharp and snappy. Because from a worker's perspective or an employee's perspective, they're trying to really just get a job or a task done. They're using a particular tool, be it software or another electronic tool, and or an app, etc. They get stuck. They need to get help straight away, and it needs to increase productivity and be really easy to read and be really accessible. And the rule of thumb there in performance support is that it needs to be either available in 2 clicks or in 10 seconds. So if you can achieve that in the workflow, you're really providing a great performance support aspect to the environment. From an organisation's perspective, they're really trying to improve productivity and reduce errors. So if their employees can get help quickly in that workflow, it's cutting down on unnecessary rework or errors in output.
So in terms of e-learning, that I guess supports that performance support piece, we're looking at things that are digital job aids or maybe explainer videos. I guess the key characteristic when you're looking at e-learning that would fall in that performance support, as Cam mentioned, it's something that can support someone in completing a particular task as quickly as possible. And I guess to that point, if we were creating, say, an explainer video, so someone's using an application, they've arrived at a certain point and they're not sure what to do next. If they had quick tips or something in the form of explainer videos, our objective would be to make that explainer video as short and succinct as possible, because we want to, one, not disrupt the workflow of that person. We just want to give them the information, and we also don't want to take up too much time. The goal is to be more efficient and be able to complete the task quicker, not spend a lot of time learning about that task. So whereas with, I guess, structured learning, we often look at, okay, what's the best way of motivating the audience, connecting with what this topic is, making it relevant to them and all that sort of thing. when you're in performance support, all those are already ticked. They're motivated because they need that information at that moment in time. It's already going to be relevant because they're accessing it at the point of need for them. So our job is to make it as short and simple as possible, rather than looking at how do we make this engaging, should we use scenario-based stuff, should we use a story. All of those sort of elements in a piece of e-learning designed to be that performance support would probably distract the learner and ultimately lead them to just trying to work out how to complete that task a different way, because our approach is, too, I guess, warm and fuzzy rather than focusing on their immediate need at that point in time. So really nice, I guess, differentiation there between if you're looking at something which is that structured training versus something that is that performance support. Very different drivers. We already have very different motivations. We know we have a captive audience, and we know that that piece is going to be relevant. So we have to work less in terms of gaining the engagement and getting someone interested in that topic. They're already there. At that point, it's up to us to deliver that information to them as quickly and as easy to access as possible. And that's, I guess, the benefit of e-learning in that piece.
So that moves us to knowledge management, which I'm sure you're probably all aware of. It's been around for obviously a long time, but in terms of learning, you want to be able to provide people with content in support of the work of their current work. And from a worker's perspective, the goal there is that they really want to be able to research a topic and get the correct answers quickly. From an organisation's perspective, the goal there is to provide easy and reliable access to information, but we need to make sure that it is in line with organisational procedures and process. And the goal there is that at different proficiencies, you can allow user-generated content to quickly and easily provide great knowledge management tools. And as software is progressing, we're kind of seeing a big overlap between the digital social learning aspects of software and knowledge management. So it's becoming quite a great area. But by providing this, it's providing another avenue for a learner to attain information and learn at a particular moment of need when they need to learn more about a topic. So it should provide reliable information. It should be consistent. It should be easy to access. It does provide the ability to add and build on an organisation's knowledge base. So bearing in mind that it's a living thing, usually knowledge management, so it's constantly evolving. And it's generally promoting knowledge share across the organisation and at each proficiency level. So access to experts is something that's probably inherent in most organisations, and I think that most people have the person they turn to if they want support or help. But here, employees are really looking to get help from more experienced people. It might be in the form of coaching and mentoring, but it's also can be more informal. And it could include getting assistance from a colleague, calling a help centre, or asking your manager or your boss. And from a worker's perspective, they really want to just consult with an expert to resolve a problem or an issue as it arises. And that grows capability over time. But when we look at moments of need for adult learning, it's really when something changes or goes wrong. It might not be documented. There might not be an instructor-led course running or an e-learning course at that particular time running to provide them information on that change, in which case they can talk to someone that has a little bit more knowledge of a system or a topic. From an organisation's perspective, they really want to be effectively leveraging the expertise of the organisation. So if you have people that are very proficient and in that maybe a master or an expert level of proficiency, you can leverage that expertise to increase the knowledge and capability of those at lower levels of proficiency. So it's really a good organic way of providing learning in the workflow or in the workforce. So as I said, it leverages expertise, it promotes knowledge and skill sharing across those that are experienced to less experienced, and really kind of encourages mentor-mentee style relationships, which is kind of really a real trend over the past kind of 5 years and where organisations generally want to get to.
So in terms of how e-learning fits into that, and this is probably one where, depending who we speak with, it's kind of a bit of a hotly debated topic. But as far as I guess my view is, providing access to an expert is probably both, in terms of real time or them as I guess a resource. So to my mind, looking at this webinar, this is probably an avenue of potentially being, in that access to expert space. We've got, two experts over here, Cameron and myself, and we're sharing our knowledge to an audience who has identified they have a need for that. So obviously you're all participating in this because you're interested in this, and we're sharing that knowledge based on, the experience we've got, and, whether it be masters or experts of this space. That's one avenue. This is actually a really exciting space for me in terms of e-learning, because it shifts a bit, I guess, depending what your definition of e-learning is. So for me, obviously e-learning, anything that's, I guess, a learning experience that's done electronically or digitally. So if you look at that, pre-recorded videos of experts could be one avenue where it's access to experts. If we look at this webinar, all our webinars are obviously available on YouTube down the track for either reference or for people who weren't able to make this particular session. So it is still giving people access to the knowledge we're sharing, and again, they will have made that decision to access that material. Obviously, virtual classrooms and those sort of virtual environments are, I guess, a very common one when you think about access to experts. Again, it's technology allowing people to connect and either have, I guess, a situation where the expert is talking to a group or one-on-one, and again, it's that situation where if it's a mentor-mentee type situation, then it's a lot more one-on-one. The technology allows it, and there's a lot more feedback, and it's very much a two-way street. As that group grows, it probably becomes more and more of a one-way street, but again, it's providing access to an expert at the time of need, and just, I guess, allowing that knowledge sharing to happen really easily. And something new, and this is something that we've been starting to play around with a little bit, is the use of, Periscope Lab and those sort of tools where we're able to just jump online and broadcast, just start broadcasting a session on a particular topic. An audience comes in, they've got the opportunity to interact with us. They're able to steer, I guess, the conversation and the topics a little bit. But again, it's, we've got a group of people who are experts. I guess in that case, you find out how much of an expert you are, depending how many people you end up in the session. But it's, again, people out there going, I'm interested in learning about this. Hey, great, I can access this expert. They're going to talk about this. They're going to share their views, their opinions, and experiences on a particular topic. And it's also an opportunity to, I guess, get a little bit of the traffic coming the other way. Through interacting with that individual, you can kind of get the specific details you need out of that particular, on that topic and that particular engagement. So it's starting to blur the lines of, I guess, what is traditionally considered e-learning, but for me, it definitely falls under this umbrella because it is an avenue of being able to, learn in a digital medium, and this one's just a little bit more live and a little bit more interesting, I guess.
Yeah, so the last area of the ecosystem is looking at social networking and collaboration. And I guess it is coming a little bit of a buzzword in the learning space around social learning, but this looks at it from either a digital or, I guess, analog or non-digital format. But the idea is that you want to share information and insights with one another so that the collective group or collective knowledge of the group and experiences of the group help solve a particular problem. So you might imagine kind of crowdsourcing a problem out to your organisation or out to the entire world and finding a solution there. And the idea is that it solves the problem and improves performance. So from an employee's perspective, they're really trying to share and gain or glean knowledge from one another in a more social or collaborative environment. And from an organisation's perspective, they're really trying to encourage the exchange and knowledge of ideas. So it's really driving innovation. The more kind of heads you put at a particular problem, the better the solution is usually going to be. So that leads to generating ideas, and usually better ideas than a single person alone. And Increases obviously collaboration because it's natural and relatively organic within an organisation, and it gives people that experience or that ability to share experiences and insights from different perspectives.
So in terms of the e-learning aspect to this, and this is probably getting a little bit trickier because when you look at that, it's people and what they're doing in their collaboration. So really, the job for us from an e-learning perspective is to either one, be a technology that helps that happen, but probably more so from my perspective is being a catalyst to people, talking about it, to collaborating. So one of the things I often say about e-learning is I'm not too fussed if someone thinks it was the greatest piece of e-learning and they agreed with everything, or if they complete a piece of learning and they go, nah, I disagree with all that. That's fine, because there will be a conversation on the back end of that. They'll get together with their peers, they'll discuss it, I guess in a non-planned perspective, or there'll be other e-learning solutions where there is a plan. Hey, you've just learned all of this, and from here you're going to have a discussion with your group, or there's a platform that allows you to discuss this underneath this topic. For e-learning, the thing that we have to make sure we don't do is we don't create something that's vanilla, that people don't want to discuss and don't want to be involved in. And I think that's probably the area where e-learning can play a part in, I guess, sparking the collaboration and sparking the social element by being something that's interesting and makes people want to discuss a topic, rather than, I guess, a situation where it's, tick the box, 20 pages of content, great, I've done it. You're never going to want to talk about that piece again. So, and it's, I guess, a fine line there is around, okay, how can e-learning lead to these discussions and this social collaboration and just have this topic more front of mind and reinforced down the track, versus if we create something that's, really bland and boring, that collaboration and that social piece may never happen because people simply just want to forget that really boring experience, and move on from that point and, hopefully never have to do it again. So yeah, it's probably an area where rather than being a specific e-learning solution, it's an approach, and I guess the way you think about e-learning that plays towards this aspect of the ecosystem. So that's, I think, we've arrived at the questions page. I think for us, the great thing about the ecosystem and e-learning is very often when we're having conversations with organisations, where we're very much about ensuring that learning isn't a transactional thing. It's going to lead to something bigger, and the learning ecosystem, especially for e-learning, is a great way for organizations to start thinking about, okay, I'm going to have this piece of e-learning, but where does it fit in that ecosystem? How is it going to be used? And how do we ensure that it isn't just a transactional thing that happens once and there's no follow-up? How do we make it something that then leads into the next stage and there's a process? And I guess, more specifically, how do we create something that is tailored to each of those stages? As we differentiated between the performance support versus structured, very different objectives, very different audience. They're in a different state, depending which one of those phases they're in. And we have to create a solution that's tailored to it. So I think what it does is it starts to help people unpack and go, okay, e-learning, I guess, it isn't the same thing to everyone, depending what you're targeting, depending what stage you're at. There's very different objectives to each solution. And obviously looking at the ecosystem, it's like, okay, how does this ecosystem achieve the goals for the organization? So yeah, really fantastic. We've just had a question. So we've got one, how would you design an e-learn that leads to discussion? Great question. I know it probably sounds perhaps a little basic, but make it interesting, make it controversial, and make it humorous. I think the experience I have around this would be, for example, compliance training. And this stands out for me because it's a story of what happens when you do create learning that is discussed. So I worked a little while ago on a project that was creating compliance training, and the approach there was, okay, let's make it something interesting. Let's give people something, one, that they wouldn't expect. Let's not try to deliver something vanilla where people won't have some sort of emotional response to it. Let's use stories. Let's challenge people. Let's maybe sometimes make them sad, maybe sometimes make them angry. Let's make them have some sort of response to this piece of e-learning, because one, that'll make it stick in their minds. What that actually does is at the end of completing a training, people will have a discussion. But the reason I really believe this works is I was at a barbecue once, and this was on a weekend, and through the fact that I talk about what I do in my role, which normally when I mention e-learning, people kind of all of a sudden have to top up their drink, or they left the stove on, and my vicinity becomes very quiet and I get lonely. But I was having a conversation and started talking about e-learning, and someone was actually kind of, oh yeah, e-learning, yeah, I know what that is. I completed some training around it. It was on sexual harassment, and they use these characters and stories and all that. And it was actually the product that the company I was with that we produced. And it was the first time ever that I guess I'd been in a situation where someone had an opinion or a thought, or even remembered to a piece of training that they did, and they were able to articulate to me what it was, and kind of say, okay, I thought it was great, and I was telling the stories and all this sort of thing. It stuck in their mind, and what it told me, if they're talking to me about this at a barbecue and they remember enough, within that organisation there's going to be conversations happening around it as well. Everyone's ultimately required to complete it at the same time. So over the lunch table, they'll probably be, I did this piece. What did you think of it? I don't think that was right. I don't agree. It's I guess looking at that and giving people something to talk to, rather than what you see in a lot of e-learning where it's just content and an assessment. No one's going to, I guess, have a meaningful conversation around something that's pure theory, because there's no there's no human side to it. When you introduce a bit of emotion, you introduce that human side to it, then you start to spark conversations, then you spark some sort of response. And I guess that helps people, one, to collaborate. It also helps that topic stick in their heads. So I guess, my tips, make e-learning humorous, use stories, use emotion, and don't be afraid to make something that's provocative, because that'll actually get people thinking, and that'll have people have some sort of response to it. Great question. I hope that that response answered it. Do we have any more questions around that? So I think, one of the questions I would also I guess often hear is the learning ecosystem. And this is one to you, Cam. Is one where many organisations will look at it and go, "This is fantastic. How do we adopt it?" So do you think it's one of those things where organisations, it's quite easy to adopt, or is it a big change for them? What sort of barriers do you find of that learning ecosystem?
Yeah, I think it's very easy to adopt, and most organisations don't probably realise that a lot of these elements of that ecosystem are happening organically within their organisation. So things like social networking and collaboration may already be happening. It's just they're not aware of it, or they're not utilising it maybe from a learning perspective. Access to experts, as I said, usually somebody's always kind of turned to the IT guy, or to someone in their group or their project or their team who's going to be the knowledge holder for when they have a particular question. So some of these things are usually already in place within organisations. Things like talent management, a lot of organisations already have the tools available, or they already have competencies, job roles, etc., career paths laid out within a talent management area, and there's usually quite a lot of content, both from a knowledge management and a structured learning perspective as well. So it's not that hard for organisations to adopt. It's actually really simple. And if you look at the content, the technologies in place, and the processes that organisations already have, it's relatively simple to adjust that so it is in the form that it's providing a very user-centric learning model. And depending on whether it's at an organisational level or a particular project implementation level, you can leverage all of those aspects that are in there in its current form.
And yeah, to Cam's point there, that's one of the exciting things about, I guess, when you deliver either, be it, from Cam's perspective, an effective structure and a way for an organisation to take on that ecosystem, or from my perspective, when it's a piece of effective e-learning, if it's really, I guess, easy to integrate, so it's already leveraging what people do, how they interact, what they're familiar with, that's when it becomes less of a challenge to bring on something that's new, because it's almost reimagining what people are already doing to have a purpose. And I guess that's something we often do from an e-learning perspective, is going, okay, what do people already do in their day-to-day? Great, that's a benchmark. So they go to YouTube, they tweet, they'll go on The Age, and they'll do all these things. Okay, fantastic. How do we leverage that information to create something that's going to be integrated and familiar for them, so they don't end up sitting through and going, I'm not sure how to do this, this is so different. You know, ultimately we're becoming more and more wired to absorb information in a particular way, and that way is, you know, quickly, on demand. I guess it's very disposable information these days, so not interested in this and being able to flick through it. And it's about, okay, how do we create environments and create solutions that are familiar to that way? You know, having a 45-minute e-learning course is just pointless these days, because by, you know, minute 15, people are probably starting to look around the room and going, oh, okay, cool, oh, well, this was interesting, I want to know something else. So it's really important to look at how does this integrate, and that's, I guess, why the ecosystem is so exciting, because as Cam said, all these things are probably organically happening in one shape or another. It's about formalizing it and then being more strategic with it to get the best out of those processes that are already happening. All right, well, unless we have any final questions coming through, I'll slowly start wrapping up. So obviously a big thank you for Cam being here today and presenting this piece. Hopefully it's been really insightful, and it's been a little bit of a catalyst to, you know, for discussion and a bit of a thought-provoking piece. Recently Cameron did a webinar on this ecosystem, and he loves talking about it, so obviously feel free to contact us if you want to have a chat with Cameron around this. Other than that, this webinar will be available, the recording of it, in the next few days on our YouTube channel. So if there's something you want to share in your organization, or you have questions, or you want to reference something, absolutely jump on there and have a look. Aside from that, obviously for those of you who've been here, keep an eye on our events page at purelearning.com.au. We regularly update that with what's sort of coming up. We're planning a few more webinars for this year, and then we'll kind of work out what we're doing for next year. We're also starting, as I mentioned, get into that lab space, so keep a lookout what myself and Matt Smith are doing around there. But yeah, it's been fantastic having you guys here today. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing many of you at the next webinar we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you.